See, I never knew depression was difficult to change. I was doing psychotherapy work using NLP before I trained in psychology. So I've been doing it for 10 years. I thought, I better go back and get a psychology degree. I thought I'll do that just in case they ever. There was talk that they might bring laws in the state where I live to limit who can do therapy. So I thought I better go get a degree. And because I had not studied psychology before studying a private practice doing psychotherapy, I was doing psychotherapy in a medical center. So a doctor invited me to work at her medical center doing therapy. Because I had not had formal training in psychology, I did not know that depression is supposedly difficult to change. And I did not know that anxiety is supposed to be difficult to change. So the attitude I had from studying NLP is, oh yeah, states have a pattern of organization. There's a pattern to how people generate a state, any state. And if you know what the pattern is, you assist the person in changing the pattern and the state changes. So all states are changeable. And so I didn't know that these things are supposed to be difficult to change. I remember the first time I worked with a guy who was depressed. He'd been depressed for 15 years. Found out how he did it. Went, oh yeah, that's structured like a phobia. He has a mental image outside of consciousness that's driving the feelings. And we had a phobia reduction process, early one back then. So I was only 23 at the time. So this is about just over 40 years ago. And I went, oh yeah, it's got the same structure. So I ran him through this process on the mental imagery that was driving the state. Took about half an hour, no longer depressed. And I thought nothing of it because nobody had told me that depression is supposed to be difficult to change. So sometimes, yeah, I was very lucky, by the way. I was very fortunate because I wasn't trained in limiting beliefs before working with people.
Hi there, welcome to the replay of our after hours discussions with professional coaches. Your exclusive complimentary Sunday session for all of our community around the world, where coaching minds unite with our people to create real world results. I am Adrian Cahill, your host and founder of the Motivate community, and more recently, Monday Morning Motivation. As a global trainer in NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, coaching, and hypnosis, this weekly gathering brings some of my colleagues from trainings, my fellow students and coaches all together in one place where we can discuss, share, help change the world by delivering free, quality information that's here to help you transform.
Can I get maybe a show of hands? How many people have had some sort of NLP training already?
I think you've only got me.
Darko. Okay, still, so this is you haven't had any.
Harry's coming.
Yeah, I see Harry. So it's Harry. So he's had some NLP training. I'm not sure if Leanne has. But
Leanne, no. I'm pretty sure not.
Okay, so look very quickly. So tonight we're going to talk about anxiety and how to manage it, and even how you can completely transform it if you want to. It's a very bread and butter, very basic thing that I do on a regular basis with clients. So I have a lot of clients who have various anxiety issues, and typically I sort it out often in one session. So I between 1 and 3. So I always say to my clients with anxiety, anxiety that it takes between 1 and 3 sessions. That way, if we do need an extra couple of sessions, we can do that. But very often it's just a session. And so we've got some powerful technology in NLP that can be applied to teaching people how to actually change. First of all, how to manage the state. Anxiety is a state if they have it, and then how to transform it if it's a bother for them. So you may well ask, well, why is NLP so effective for working with anxiety? Well, we need to look at what NLP is. So NLP studies patterns of thinking and behavior. My favorite shorthand definition of NLP is either from John Grinder or Judith Delosier. Judith used to be married to John Grinder. And the definition, this is the simple definition: NLP is an accelerated learning strategy for detecting and utilizing patterns in the world. And to put that into plain English, it's a fast, efficient, effective way for people to be able to recognize patterns in themselves and patterns in other people and patterns in relationships between people, and to be able to use that information to change patterns, to help yourself to change patterns and to assist other people in changing patterns. So this points to this whole notion that we can model out the patterns of, for example, how a thinking process a person might use to do something. So if you take a best performer in something and spend some time with them, we can map out the thinking processes they use to do what they do. In terms of our states of mind, every single state that we experience has a pattern of organization. There's a pattern in how the state is organized. And if you know how the state is organized, the pattern of how the state is organized, then you can change the pattern and hence change the state. So one of the wonderful things about NLP is when it applies to anxiety, if you experience anxiety yourself, or you're coaching somebody, or you have a friend who has anxiety, the first thing we want to do is find out what is the pattern or patterns that they use, the patterns that generate the anxiety for them. And there will be differences from person to person in terms of how they generate anxiety. But if you know how they're doing it, then you can assist them in changing it, and changing it very quickly and very effectively. Now, would anybody like a definition of what a pattern is? So I've been assuming that we know what a pattern is, but I just want to check. Would anybody like an explanation of what a pattern is?
Chris, I think it's worthwhile to clarify it because people here who haven't done the background.
Okay, so all a pattern is a repeating sequence where if you've got the first part of the sequence, you can predict the second. Now, I don't know. I'm not using earphones or earbuds. I'm just using the computer microphone. But I don't know if you can hear a cat yowling in the background. Well, we've got one yowling in the background at the moment.
It is clear.
It's quite distracting, to be honest. And so one of my cats is a Bengal, her breed. Now, if she comes up to me and she stands about a quarter to half a meter from me, and if I see her focusing up on my shoulder, and then I see her pushing down onto her paws, I can predict that she's about to leap up onto my shoulder, because I've seen that whole sequence of behaviors before. And so when I perceive the first part of the sequence, because I've seen it multiple times, I can predict she's about to jump up onto my shoulders. Okay, that's a pattern. Now, for ourselves, everything we do is made up of patterns. Everything. How we prepare breakfast or how we eat breakfast, how we drive a car, how we converse to our partner if we have a partner, how we parent our children if we're a parent, how we negotiate with somebody, how we manage other people, how we manage ourselves, and how we do various emotions. They're all patterns. You can't get away from patterns. They're everywhere. So we have scores of patterns of behavior as human beings, and they're repeating sequences. They have a structure. And so, for example, if you're working with couples, not only have I recently been doing more work with clients with anxiety, I've been seeing more couples recently. I sometimes do couple counseling. Now, by the way, instead of taking 12, 13, 14 sessions in terms of couple counseling, often I'm getting results in 3 sessions. Big changes in 3 sessions. So when a couple is having a difficulty, typically there are patterns in how they're interacting and communicating with each other. If you go, oh, here's the pattern, this is how it works. One partner does this, that triggers a response from the other partner's state changes, and when their state changes, there's a change in their voice tone and acts as a trigger on the first partner. You go, okay, so that's how it works. Let's say they're having a conflict, they're having arguments, this is how they do it. Great. Knowing that there's more than one place where we can intervene to change the pattern. There's more than one way there's multiple places we could intervene. But it's a pattern that's running between 2 people. Now, tonight we're talking about anxiety and how we can manage anxiety and transform anxiety. Keep in mind, in some cases, people end up taking medication because of anxiety. So for some people, it's a very, very serious problem. And one of the biggest challenges is with doing this type of work and applying it to treating and transforming anxiety is sometimes it seems almost unbelievable to the person who has anxiety that it can be changed, because they may have got into the system, they may be on medication, they may have had therapy, they could have had 10, 15 sessions of therapy, and they've still got anxiety. And here we say, oh, well, we can assist you in 1 to 3 sessions to transform that. But let's talk about, so what is anxiety? Anxiety is a named state. So it's a state of mind. I don't even like the word mind because it suggests there's a difference between our minds and our bodies, and there isn't a difference. It's one system. But anyway, it's a state. And it's a state that's common enough in a culture that it gets given a name. So obviously anxiety is common enough in the English-speaking world to have a name in English, anxiety. Now, I think it's common enough from talking to people who speak other languages, who are fortunate or blessed enough to have a second or third language. In some cases, yes, I've been told that yes, we have a word that means anxiety in our language as well. So if anybody here speaks a second language, the question I have for you first of all, do you have a word that has the same meaning? Do you have anxiety in your culture and language? So Doug has just nodded for yes.
Yes, yes.
Yep. Yep.
Anxiousness in my language.
Yeah. Okay. So, so when a state is common enough in a culture, it gets given a name. So name states are what we refer to as emotions. An emotion is a state that's common enough to have a name. Does that make sense? However, there are plenty of states that you experience that have not been named. Because and by the way, you're always in some state. You're in a state right now. Now, the type of state I'd hope you're in, a state that would be beneficial for tonight, would be a state of interest, being really fascinated and interested, because that state supports learning. So that would be a great state to be in right now. And so let's look at anxiety. It's also think about it, the name itself is an abstract noun. Does everyone understand what an abstract noun is? So a concrete noun would be something like, here we are, watch. That's an object. It's got its name, it's a concrete noun. Chair, okay? Person. We can also, locations, Sydney, Australia, is a concrete noun. But our emotions are abstract. In NLP, we call them nominalization. So you can't put anxiety in a wheelbarrow. I could take my watch and stick it in a wheelbarrow. So, because it's a concrete object, but I can't put anxiety in a wheelbarrow. And another test for what we call nominalization is it goes in the sentence, and ongoing. Name your nominalization. So an ongoing anxiety, an ongoing depression, an ongoing determination. But you can't I can't say an ongoing watch. It doesn't make sense. If you're a native speaker of English, it doesn't make sense. Or an ongoing chair. Really? An ongoing chair? We don't talk that way, do we, in English? So we know it's an abstract noun, what we call nominalization. And normalizations are when we take processes, or here we go, patterns, and treat them as if they're a fixed thing. So part of the problem is people talk about, I have anxiety. A person says, I have anxiety. And the coach or the psychologist or the therapist thinks they know what that means, because it has a definition. The definition in English is an apprehension about the future. You look up an English dictionary and you see it'd be a definition like that, an apprehension about the future. However, I want to know how somebody presents to me and they say they have anxiety and they want to work with it and change it. I want to know how it works for them. I want to be able to unpack how they do it. What's the pattern or patterns they do that generate the unwanted state? So be aware that when people use nouns for emotions, that buried inside that is actually a pattern or a process. And it's an opportunity, if the person wants to change that particular state, it's an opportunity to find out how they do it. Okay. By the way, I'm going to talk about some of the common patterns that people do to be anxious, and then how to change those patterns. That's what I'm going to talk about. Also, if there was anybody here who has anxiety and would like to change it, I'm happy to do a demonstration as well. And just in case nobody here does experiences anxiety, um, we could always have a volunteer who pretends to have anxiety. We could do it that way. They could role play as if they were anxious, and we could do it that way. So,
Chris, could
yeah.
I just add a little something, please? A client I have doesn't talk about the word anxiety, and English is not the first language, but talks about a nervous feeling and talks about feelings. So I haven't used the word anxiety, but also talks about phobia, that because I get this feeling in a certain place has already. So I just want to cover that context a bit, which might clarify. Thank you.
Right. So so people may have other names for it. The giveaway is typically if a person has anxiety or say they're nervous about something, if they're nervous or anxious about a future, a possible future, a future event, that's anxiety. But the key is part of how it works. A person to be anxious will be thinking about the future as part of how they do it. People don't feel anxious about the past. There are other emotions that are generated by thinking about the past, like appreciation. I look back or I think back on something that happened and I'm appreciative about what happened in the past. That would be a positive example. Or guilt. I think about something I did that I should not have done in the past. And then I feel, and that generates guilt in the present. So it's from past to present. Um, when we're happy, we're not typically people experience happiness in the present. It's a present-oriented state. So anxiety, determination, excitement. Typically, people are thinking about what they say they're representing in their mind something to do with the future. So that's the first thing is there's a time element involved in terms of how people do anxiety. Now, this is, now I'm going to use some jargon and then I'm sorry about that, but I use jargon and I'll explain what I mean, okay? So the first thing I do if a person has is anxiety is I want them to be able to interrupt the state and get out of that state quickly. And so for those who are trained in NLP, I will train or I will coach my client to be able to go into what we call a third position, perceptual position. Now, all that is, so let me illustrate with a story. In fact, I'm going to give you a little mental exercise. Are you okay with a mental experiment? Okay, so can I get a show of hands? Who has been to a playhouse, a theatre to watch and listen to a play? Who's gone to a play? Only a couple of us have been to a play. Okay, but you know what a playhouse is, a theatre where you have actors on a stage. We all know what that is. Is that correct? Yeah. So this is what we do. I want you to imagine a theatre and it has a stage, and on the stage there is a man or a woman who looks and sounds remarkably like you. So, for example, Stella, if you were doing this, you would see a woman on stage and you go, my goodness, she looks and sounds just like me. Okay, so you'd be looking at an actress on the stage who looks and sounds like you. Of course, Harry, if you would see a man on stage who looks and sounds like you. Okay, so can you just do that for a moment? And your role, I'm going to tell you what your job is, by the way. You are the director of the theatre. So you direct the actors. And there's a person on stage who looks and sounds remarkably like you. So as the director, you're observing that person, the actor or actress. Now, that observer position, as if you were the director of a theatre, we call that third position. So one of the first things I coach a client in is how to take a position as if they were a director observing themselves. So it's as if they're observing themselves, that person on stage who looks and sounds like them, who is anxious. So that's the first thing I like my clients to be able to do. And as the director, you, the director, are not experiencing the emotion. Now, you may still have feelings, but you might have feelings about the performance. I think that could be done a little better there, that we need to have a look. We might want to adjust the actor on the stage or the actress on the stage. But you may have feelings about the performance as the director, but you do not feel the anxiety. Does that make sense? So we're basically training the client to be able to take a director position, or what we call a third position, and we call it a clean third, so they're not feeling the emotion. And then we have them go back into their position. They become themselves, the position of the self, and they feel the emotion, they feel the anxiety. Then they are trained to pop back out, observe themselves, cleanly detached again. And I like them to go backwards and forwards from the position of experiencing the emotion and observing that man or woman that looks like them who has the emotion. And the reason I do, okay, any guesses? Let's see how intuitive you are. What would be useful for anxiety or any emotion the person wants to have choice about if they learn that they can step back and detach from it at any time they want to? What's the benefit?
Think we can observe ourselves with our emotion, and then we can make a change when we are detached.
That's right. So if you can step back and observe yourself for any emotion you want to change, the fact that you've interrupted the state, haven't you? You've stepped away from the state, then you have the possibility, you've got the potential to be able to choose a different state to begin with. So that's the first thing I train my clients in. Because once they can do that, I'm now comfortable having them be in the state, experiencing anxiety, and then we unpack or deconstruct how they do it. Because it doesn't matter if the state's quite intense and unpleasant, because anytime they want to, anytime they choose to, they can pop out and take an observer or a director position on themselves and detach from it for a few moments or a few minutes. So in a way, this observer position is like a safety line.
Yes.
So if you've got a safety line, it means you can experience the state, even if it's unpleasant, because you know that at any time you need to, you can step out and take the position of a director, the position of an observer. And that's a powerful thing to do. So to illustrate this, I had a client come to see me. His wife took him to see me. So his wife brought in her husband. That in itself is interesting. That tells you something. He was depressed. He'd been depressed for 3 or 4 years. was how taking psychiatric medication for depression. He was taking a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, what they call an SSRI. And he was also seeing a psychologist and had something like 12 sessions, therapy sessions, and he was still depressed. Now, because he had done a lot of therapy and he'd be depressed for, I think it was at least 3 years, I can't come out and say, we'll sort this out in a session or two, can I? Because his belief is he's seriously depressed, and they're so depressed they've got him on medication. So therefore it can't be something that's simple and straightforward to change. So what I did, I taught him how to step out to the observer position, what we call third position. I trained him in that. I had him rehearse it multiple times in the session. And this was his preparation. His job, his mission was for the following week, in preparation for our next session, he was to practice popping out to the observer position for 20 minutes a day for the week. And I said, then we can work with the depression. So this is important work you need to do. You've got to do it, okay? It's essential. Anyway, he came in the following week and he said, it's been a very, very strange week. It was a really strange week. He was hardly depressed at all during the week. Do you understand why I framed it that way as an exercise? That's to bypass any limiting beliefs that a person may hold that depression is difficult to change. See, I never knew depression was difficult to change. I was doing psychotherapy work using NLP before I trained in psychology. So I've been doing it for 10 years. I thought, I better go back and get a psychology degree. I thought, I'll do that just in case they ever, there was talk that they might bring laws in the state where I live to limit who can do therapy. So I thought I better go get a degree. And because I had not studied psychology before studying a private practice doing psychotherapy, I was doing psychotherapy in a medical center. So a doctor invited me to work at her medical center doing therapy. And she used to just send patients in to see me, you know. So, because I had not had formal training in psychology, I did not know that depression is supposedly difficult to change. And I did not know that anxiety is supposed to be difficult to change. So the attitude I had from studying NLP is, oh yeah, states have a pattern of organization. There's a pattern to how people generate a state, any state. And if you know what the pattern is, you assist the person in changing the pattern and the state changes. So all states are changeable. And so I didn't know that these things are supposed to be difficult to change. I remember the first time I worked with a guy who was depressed. He'd been depressed for 15 years, found out how he did it, went, oh yeah, that's structured like a phobia. He has a mental image outside of consciousness that's driving the feelings. And we had a phobia reduction process, early one back then. So I was only 23 at the time. So this is about just over 40 years ago. And I went, oh yeah, it's got the same structure. So I ran him through this process on the mental imagery that was driving the state. Took about half an hour, no longer depressed. And I thought nothing of it. Because nobody had told me that depression is supposed to be difficult to change. So sometimes, yeah, I was very lucky, by the way. I was very fortunate because I wasn't trained in limiting beliefs before working with people. So, so the first thing I do, so backing up, is I train the person how they can take an observer position. We call it perceptual positions. And if anybody wants a worksheet, I'll send one to Adrian and he can forward it on. Or do I send it to you, Darko?
You can send it to me also.
Okay, I'll send it to both of you, okay? And then either yourself or Adrian can distribute it to people who attended tonight. And that way you've got a worksheet on how to do that. In fact, I think we might even give you a link to a video demonstration so you can see how it's done, okay? That's the first thing I do. The second thing I do, I want to unpack the state. So I want to find out how that person does it. Now, not everybody does it these ways, but I'm going to mention two of the most common ways that people generate anxiety. Should we do that? Here we go. Okay. So people typically are thinking about the future. Well, how are they thinking about the future? Well, one way to do it is I run mental images, mental movies of a future event where I imagine myself not achieving the outcome I want. So if I have, part of it maybe I have high standards for my behavior. I've got standards. Okay, I might have high standards for my behavior. And so we'll make this up. I have, my boss told me to have a meeting with him on Friday. I've got to go into the boss's office on Friday to present a project I've been doing. Let's say that's the content. So I imagine myself doing a poor presentation. Or I imagine my boss giving me negative feedback on my presentation. I do something like that, and that generates the anxious feelings. Does that make sense? This is just one way a person could do it. Okay. Here's an alternative way. I run a movie, just like before, of a possible future. Once again, a possible future that I don't like. And I talk to myself about it. I have inner dialogue. I talk to myself about how it's going to be a disaster. My boss is going to give me bad feedback. Or if I mess this up, I won't get a promotion or whatever. But I have all this internal dialogue about the movie. And then I generate the feelings. That's another way to do it. Okay, I'll mention a third way to do it. I talk to myself and then I generate pictures from what I'm talking, from my inner dialogue. And then it's the pictures that generate the feelings. That's another way to do it. Does this make sense? Different ways you can. Yeah, by the way, if you know how to do this, in a way, think of it being like an inoculation. If you know how to do this, and then you find yourself doing it and feeling anxious, you go, oh, that's what I'm doing. Oh, that's not useful. I'll stop that. So if you know how to, so think about it. If you know how to do it, then you've got the choice to not do it. In fact, I would suggest you do something different. Okay, is that okay? So here's now multiple ways to work with it. One, I could treat the anxiety as a message, as a communication from my unconscious mind. So if I run a movie of doing a poor presentation to my boss, I could treat that anxious feeling as a signal to prepare myself to do a great presentation. So sometimes a little anxiety can be useful, and to treat it as a signal that says, hey, get prepared. Let's prepare for this. Let's prepare really well for this future event. So that's one approach. It depends on the person which approach you use. So here's one approach. So if that's an approach that I do, then I'll run them through a format, a little exercise that my partner and I developed. We formalized it. We modeled it out of John Grinder, actually, that we call outcome intention consequences. So I will actually run that process and then do something called the well-formed outcome. So just as a general rule of thumb, by the way, everybody here, one of the things that you do as a human being is you envision and create in your mind desirable futures. Right? Every one of you has done this. Now, they might be a grand vision, a career. So maybe when you're 18 or 17, or maybe younger, you may have decided you wanted to have a particular career and you created in your mind a future where you develop that career for yourself. Or it can be a mundane thing. I imagine myself tomorrow morning popping round the corner from where I live, going to a fantastic bakery that makes very good coffee and ordering myself a very, very good cup of coffee to take away. That's still envisioning a future. It's a pretty mundane thing, but you know, it all adds to the quality of life. Okay. Or I decide I want to cook a very nice meal for my partner and I. So I envision different possible meals that I could cook, and then I go ahead and then I plan it out. I go gather the resources. I make sure I've got all the ingredients I need. I organize a time frame, how much time I'm going to need to prepare dinner, and then I go ahead and I prepare a fabulous dinner. So it starts with thinking about a future of some sort. We all do this. The key is to do it well. So often one way, if a person's imagining a future event and it not working out, well, probably a good idea to reimagine that event and to make it what we call a well-formed outcome. So, is what I want to create, that future event, is it something that's humanly possible and plausible and doable? What do I actually want to have happen? So think about it in the positive. This is what I want to create. Envision it that way. What resources do I require to achieve this? Define my resources. Make sure it's within my ability, my agency to acquire or create the resources I need for that future. Plan it out. Make sure the costs and consequences to create that are acceptable to myself. And check to make sure I really want to do this. And if I'm congruent about doing it, that is internally, yes, I want this, then I go ahead and I start working on it. I prepare for that future. I create that future. So, and before that, I typically do outcome, intention, consequences, which I won't go into right now, but because that would take a fair bit of time to explain that. But I do this thing called outcome, intention, consequence, and then I make sure the future's well formed. Now, so I sometimes do that with a client with anxiety if they're envisioning futures and it's not the way they want it to be. And so that's one approach. Two, another approach is, let's use the same example. I'm anxious about making a presentation on Friday to my boss, and I imagine my boss judging me, judging my performance, okay? So then I would imagine the way I want it to turn out. I would do that to begin with in terms of the outcome itself. I would then do the same thing with a client, but I use myself as an example. I would note what is important to me about that event. I would identify the criteria or standards I have for my performance. So quite often when people are anxious, they often have high standards for their performance, and quite often they haven't examined those standards. So anybody here got high standards for themselves who occasionally gets a little anxiety? Okay, Jay, fantastic. So just think of any example will do where you've had this.
I've got one where I've taken a week. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't now just to,
Are you content free?
Content free. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So just think of an example. Put yourself back in the memory, and you've got standards. So when you think about your standards, do you know what they are? Your standards for your performance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got standards for your performance. Now, here's the interesting thing that goes with standards, what we call complex equivalence in NLP. That is, just to deconstruct that jargon, all it means is, what is the behavioral evidence? How do you know when you are meeting your standards? What's the evidence in behavior? So I have a standard for my performance, and the way I measure the standard is I have some behavior that I do to meet the standard.
Actually, it's visual.
Okay.
I look at the completed job, and visually I examine, and if I find imperfections, then I become a little annoyed, and I have to fix it.
Good, that's right. So when you find an imperfection, there's a mismatch on your standard.
Yes.
Okay? So the flaws or okay, that's a mismatch on the standard. Now, by the way, if you don't mind sharing, what does it mean about you when you make when it's not correct, when you haven't done it perfectly?
I don't necessarily think about myself. I become annoyed because I have to do it again.
Okay. There's because I have to do it again. Okay.
Yes.
Mismatch means I have to do it again. Okay.
Mm.
The mismatch is feedback that's not up, that hasn't met your standards, and that means I have to do it again. So here's another component of the state. The what we call modal operator that you use. I have to.
Yeah.
Okay. So in NLP, there's a thing called modal operators. So
sorry, one bit. Okay, yeah.
I just checked to make sure it wasn't me. Okay, that's great. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about modal operators. So modal operators are a type of word that we use in sentences, and we've got two forms. We have modal operators of possibility and modal operators of necessity. So I'm going to illustrate some. So some possibility, modal, M-O-D-A-L, modal operators is a linguistic term, of possibility would be words like I can do this. I could do this. I may do this. I might do this. I would do this. Okay. So those words note the possibility. I can, right? I could. Doesn't mean I'm going to. I could do this. It's not the same as I'm going to do this. Okay. So I could take the afternoon off tomorrow and go to the beach. I might go to the beach. Actually, I'm not going to, but anyway, I'm just saying. Those are modal operators of possibility. So you'll find these modal operators when we think about possibility. Now, we also have necessity. I have to fix this. See, I have to fix it. But here's some examples of modal operators of necessity. I must fix it. I ought to fix it. I need to fix it. Okay? I've got to fix it. I should fix it. Is that making sense to everybody? So sometimes we have these modal operators operating, and often they operate with anxious states. And they operate in other states as well. So I have to fix it. Now, I can also negate my modal operators. So can becomes can't. I can't do it. Could becomes couldn't. Would becomes wouldn't. May becomes may not. So there's the possibilities negated. Does that make sense? And then I can have modal operators of necessity negated. Should becomes shouldn't. Must becomes mustn't. Ought becomes ought not. Need becomes need not, etc. Does that make sense? So often you'll find the modal operators operating that the person is using with their inner dialogue about the future, and it often relates to the standards they have for themselves about their performance. So it's all part of how a person gets anxious. Now, you get a lot of variation in terms of the type of modal operators that people use for anxiety. But for example, a person might do the following. My boss might give me negative feedback if I don't do this correctly.
Chris, I just had a thought while I'm there.
Hold on, before you say, check in with everybody else. Does that make sense, first of all?
Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah,
just to let you know, there is 2 questions in the chat.
Yeah, I've just had a look at them, and Harry, I've just seen them, and I will respond to you in a couple of minutes. It was from Harry. Yes, it is from Harry. Fantastic. I'll respond to those in a couple of minutes. Okay, Jay.
I had a thought, is that I was saying I wanted to fix it.
That's right. So you substitute with something like, I want to fix it. Note what state you have. So put yourself back there. When you said, I have to do it, you felt a little anger. Okay. Now shift it to, I want to fix it, and note what state you feel.
I actually feel in control, empowered.
Okay. So you have more agency. Okay. Typically, when you feel a greater sense of agency, there's a lessening or a complete disappearance of the anxiety if a person's doing anxiety. Agency is very, very important. Okay. So this is the thing. Here's some other ones that are useful, words that are useful. Modal operators. So I wanted to do this. Try this one. I will do this. I will fix it. Here's another one. It was a similar class to what you've just been referring to linguistically. I choose to fix it. They're all empowering modal operators. Okay. See, most people are not conscious. People typically, when they talk to themselves, are conscious of the content and the feeling part of the state, but they're not conscious of the actual linguistic structure of what they're saying and how the grammar, the linguistic structure influences the state that they're actually in. And so, but let me, Harry, I've still got you flagged. I will answer your questions in a couple of minutes. So just to illustrate, a person might do anxiety by going, well, my boss my boss might give me negative feedback, and I don't want that to happen. Well, I'm using a modal operator, aren't I? And the very fact that I say that suggests that I have a standard about my performance. In fact, I've got a standard about somebody else's perception of my performance, my boss. So it tells you some standards involved, and I'm envision this myself performing poorly, and that's a mismatch on my standards, and that's part of how I generate the anxious feelings. So part of it is I envision what I actually want to have happen to start off with. So we go back to what we call the well-formed outcome format, and I then choose whatever modal operators are empowering for me, so that I will take action to prepare myself adequately to perform in a way that meets my performance and gets positive feedback from my boss. Does that make sense? That changes the state.
So, Marta, I asked for clarification here.
Okay, and then I want to go
get to Harry.
Harry's questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I looked at this job had to be redone, painting.
Yeah.
And if I had said to myself, okay, I really want to do this to make it look good, what you're saying is it would have been less of creation of an anxiety, or in the instance, it was actually procrastination. I put off doing it.
Yeah. So if I imagine myself doing the job well, even if I have to make adjustments based on feedback to improve, to get it the way I want it, but I imagine myself getting there and achieving that.
Achieving it.
I'm probably going to have that. I'm probably not going to be I won't be procrastinating.
Interesting.
If I imagine, if I imagine myself not being capable of getting it to my own standard, I might forget it, number one. And two, I might actually avoid doing it in the first place.
Wow. You've opened some cans of worms there. Thank you.
But once again, the key is backing up to, just go back to first principles. The framing right at the beginning of tonight was, look, our emotions have a structure. In fact, all our states have a structure. There's patterns that we are doing, patterns that generate the state. If we know the patterns that create the state, then we have one or more ways we can change the state. And we want to be able to change the states to states that actually support ourselves in achieving what we choose to achieve in life. That's the idea. Harry, two questions. The two ways of anxiety you're talking about, are they similar with, I don't know that word, EUSTRESS?
Yeah, I've heard.
No stress, is it?
Well, there's two kinds of stress. One is the positive stress and one is the negative stress. Like you said, the positive stress, when you go for an interview, you feel a little bit pressure, but I have to prepare. I know I have to prepare for the interview. That's a positive stress. And the negative stress would be I anticipate some negative future or feedback.
That's right. So I'd agree with that. I haven't seen that word before, but I do agree with that. And
yeah, maybe that's just from the German.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to take that if you don't mind. That's fantastic. So yes, there is, and this is another thing. So this idea of stress, certainly in the English-speaking world, psychologists have produced I think I talked about last time we had a session here. I don't know how the hell they did it, but they've got this kind of table that worked out, and they assign different levels of stress to different things in life, to different life events. Like changing a job is supposed to be very stressful. Um, um, Shifting countries, if you decide to immigrate somewhere, um, um, getting married is supposed to be fairly stressful. Getting divorced is, for most people is fairly stressful. I understand. The birth of a child, the death of a loved one, etc. But the point is, um, there are people in the world who have challenging experiences who don't get stressed. That's the interesting thing. So I don't think this kind of attempt to quantify stress by some psychologists, psychological researchers, is useful because it doesn't apply to everybody. And the thing is, what's interesting to me, what is it about people who can be in challenging situations, who thrive and are resourceful in those contexts? What are they doing that is different to people who get stressed in those contexts? That's what's interesting to me, and that's triggered by Harry's comment about these two forms of stress. The one in the positive form, which which I think is more like the person who has a resourceful, resilient, competent response to challenging situations, in contrast to the person who is distressed, who in by challenging context. So that's my response. I hope that's adequate and useful, Harry. And the other question is, you mentioned desired future before. Is it the same? Is it like a compelling future? Well, yeah, it's related. The idea of a compelling future is a future that you represent in a way that is motivating, so that you are motivated to create that future. And some people in the NLP community talk about compelling futures. Um, um, and I remember, you could play with technical terms, some modalities to code an experience to make it, to a future to make it more compelling. Absolutely, you can do things like that. What I have found is, if you are congruent about the future you're creating, that you envision in your mind, where's the creation of future start? It starts in your mind. So you represent the future somehow, pictures, sounds, and feelings in your mind. If that future is something that fits with important values, like core values, significant values, a person will be automatically motivated, and that future will be automatically compelling. Personally, I have a concern about manipulating some modality coding of a future to make it compelling. Because if your person has to consciously, mentally manipulate their representations of the future to make it compelling, surely if the futures they're choosing to create fit with their values, it will automatically be compelling. So personally, the way I work the futures with people is I want to make sure that futures I'm assisting people in creating are congruent with important values for them, and the feedback to me that the futures they're envisioning are congruent with their values is that they will be automatically compelling. So whether a future is compelling or not is feedback about the ecology, the personal ecology of the person's, ecology within the person's mind and being, in terms of about what they want. Now that got a little technical and a little jargonistic. I hope that was okay with people. But as a general rule of thumb, I recommend that you create futures for yourself that fit with your values. You know, because then you're more likely to be satisfied in life. So I was very interested about this when I was around 21. Because I met some people who were very fulfilled in their lives, and I was curious about what was it about these people, as opposed to people who are miserable with their lives. And it became pretty clear to me that the people who were very fulfilled were doing activities and creating futures that were aligned with really important, or what I call core values. And because that's one of the things I was interested in when I first got I got involved with NLP just before I turned 21. It's very lucky. It's just luck. Fantastic luck, actually. I had an intuitive response about it when I first read about it. I read an article in a magazine called Psychology Today magazine. At the end of the article, I just knew it was for me. And the other thing that went with that was I knew the career I'd been trained in was not for me. So I was looking around for something else. I knew something was missing, and I consciously could not put my finger on what was missing. But I knew that what I'd been doing was not a good fit for me. And so I was reading lots of things and having lots of conversations with people, just exploring, very open-minded to the world. And then I read this article and went, wow. At the end of the article, I just went, that's for me. It was bang, it was a fit. So my unconscious mind kind of gave me the response. Went, explore that.
Boom! You made it here! Good on you. Make sure you click the subscribe button below and check out the playlist at the end. If you'd like to come along to our Sunday sessions where we host a live, free Q&A for our students and members, you're welcome. I'll see you there.